Hello and welcome to the Leaderonomics show. Today we have Dr. Mazlan Othman with us, who is our first astrophysicist in Malaysia. Welcome to the show and thank you for coming by today.
Hi.
Yeah, could you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
I'm basically a physicist. I did my PhD in astrophysics in the University of Otago, New Zealand. So I came back to Malaysia and became a lecturer at University Kebangsaan Malaysia. From there, while I was at UKM, I taught astronomy, astrophysics, as well as physics. So that's my first 5 years or so.
What was it that initially inspired you to go into this field?
Into physics. I fell in love with physics when I was about 13 or 14, when I first was exposed to science in school. Then after I was Form 3, which I think is about 15 or so, the teachers told me I must go into the field of science, pure science. I was wanting to go into English literature and art and things like that, but they didn't allow me to do that. They put me in science straight away. Well, I don't, of course, I can say it right at the outset that that's not a decision I regret at all. I'm glad that they made that decision for me in the beginning. So when I was doing physics, doing science, I discovered physics and fell in love with physics. And even though, the later part of school, I was sort of groomed to go to medical school.
Okay.
I did not want that. Right. So I was determined that at university I would go and I would read physics.
Wow. Were there other challenges you faced at that time, given that people were sort of recommending you towards a certain direction, and the field itself is very male dominated?
Yeah. So it had nothing to do with it being male dominated, because I was in an all-girls school, and I don't think we thought about a field as being male dominated or not. I had a backup plan. I thought that if I wasn't allowed to do physics or couldn't do physics, and if I did go to medical school, I would do something to do with the brains. And I thought being a neurosurgeon would be quite cool. Because the brain is all about connections. We equated the brains to electrical connections, and that would have been the closest I would have got to physics. But luckily for me, I got a scholarship, a Colombo Plan scholarship, to go to New Zealand to read physics. And that's what I did. And it's only at the university level that I discovered astrophysics, astronomy and astrophysics. And so I realized that when I saw what astronomy and astrophysics were, that it was that lead to the arts that I really wanted to do when I was very young. Because astronomy and astrophysics, especially astronomy, there's so many mysteries. And it's very, very much very closely related to philosophy, religion, aesthetics, and of course there's a whole lot of mathematics and physics, which I like in the first place. So it was like an epiphany for me, to have discovered astronomy and to realize that this is a combination of everything I've always wanted to do.
And what were some of these mysteries that you have discovered since then?
Oh, that regardless or despite the best technologies that we have today and the best scientific brains that are working on this subject, we don't know 95% of that universe. What we know today is only 5%, maybe even less. If I give you a talk, I can explain to you about 95% of the universe, of this universe of ours, and 95% we don't know. So that's the first part, but there are also many other things that we don't know.
And how does that you know, knowing that we only know so little, right? What does that mean for you?
Well, that means that it gives a person room for imagination, for exploration, to feed your curiosity, because I think being curious is very, very important. You take it from a child right until you die. I think you must be curious. And astronomy drives curiosity, drives mystery. And at the same time, there's a lot of philosophy and still a lot of science that needs to be done.
Right. Doctor, so in your journey thus far, right, what would be some discoveries or highlights that you've had that might have changed your perspectives a little bit on life?
Of course, I don't make all these discoveries, as I said, so there are different kinds of perspectives. One is the perspective on the knowledge, and of course the other is on my life itself, which is quite different. But in terms of astronomical discoveries, changing the perspective of knowledge, they're quite profound, and especially for me, I find it extremely inspiring or awe-inspiring that 95% of the universe out there we don't know anything about, and it's what is driving all of our research right now, and the best minds are being used to discover what is that 95% that we don't know anything about.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back shortly after the break. And we're back with Dr. Mazlan Othman talking to us about her discoveries as an astrophysicist. Right, so Doctor, would you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you might have faced? Or maybe obstacles along the way? Yeah.
Okay, there are, of course, in everybody's life, there are two kinds of challenges. One is the career challenge, and one is their own personal challenge. So let me talk about the career challenge. If I had to name what would be the hardest phase of my life in terms of working towards something, the first would have been my PhD.
Right.
Doing my PhD, it was tough in the sense that you had to find something new, and also because I was doing my PhD in New Zealand, we were quite isolated from the rest of the world. I mean, I always tell my friends in New Zealand, I'll come back, but it'll be a while, because New Zealand is only on the way to the Antarctic, I said. Anyway, it's interesting because I did go to the Antarctic. I did go to Antarctica later on. I did stop in New Zealand. We were isolated. But the good thing about that is we had to do everything from scratch. Whereas if you were doing a PhD in the UK, most universities were very well equipped. You walk into a lab and most things are there. In New Zealand, not only were they poor, but they were also isolated. And so we had to invent, and we had to create all our equipment, and I had to make up, design and build my own equipment, and there were also fewer people to talk to. And so it was a challenge in that sense, but of course it put me in good state, because I was always in the state of mind later on in my whole career that you do not depend on anybody. You had to be totally independent, and doing my PhD taught me that. But it was still a very lonely time, very hard time in terms of the science. And amazingly enough, the next challenge, the next hard phase of my life in terms of working on something was the astronaut program. Right. That went on for from about 2003 to his launch, 2007. So there's about the same length of time as my PhD. Yeah. And it was really tough. Not so much the science, there was no science to it. Of course, we had to do the science, but that was all easy, because what was difficult was it was very high profile. The public was interested in it. There was a lot of scrutiny, lots of allegations that we were spending government money, whereas I had to keep explaining to people that it was a part of an offset program, that the government did not pay Russia for the training and the launch of the astronauts. So that was one, the public side of it. The other side of it was the political pressure, you know, because it was something that had huge political mileage for someone or for 2 or 3 people, and they wanted to make sure it was that mileage was as long as it could be for them. Whereas as a scientist, my focus, or I thought my priorities were different. Like I wanted to focus on the education, the science, you know. But this did not, you know, have political mileage. But the media, so okay, the public, of course, you'd expect them to feel a part of this program. The first time I spoke about this to the Prime Minister was because whenever I met the media and the public, they did not care about how many satellites we were going to build, or what sort of good it would bring to the country, you know. At the end of that interview, they would ask, so now that we have a space agency, when are we going to send a Malaysian into space? Because they thought we were like, oh, we're going to be like NASA, you know. And the first time I was asked this question, I said, no, this is not a priority. Second time, I said the same thing. But by the third time, you know, I knew that it was not an answer the public wanted, especially the media. And then when I went to see Mahathir, that time Mahathir was the Prime Minister the next time, I asked him, you know, I know I'm missing on this, so give me a clue. And he said that every now and then the country needed something that would inspire the people, instill excellence in the young people, and unite the people. So very, very good reasons for doing that. And of course, it's a long story. Then we went on to do the astronaut program. But then there was this public scrutiny, you know, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. And I remember some skirmishes I had with the media when I talked about teh tarik and roti canai, you know, in space, because a lot of the programs, when you see NASA, the European Space Agency, whenever they bring the people into space, there is a focus on the culture. And I wanted to focus on the culture. I said education, science. The third was the culture, and the religion, which included religion too, actually. But this was not popular in people's mind. And the reason why I mentioned about the astronaut could be looking at teh tarik in space, I hadn't thought too. I thought by saying that everybody understood what I meant. But of course, some people used it as a means to deprecate the program by saying, why do we spending all this money to do teh tarik, you know? Whereas my whole idea was to actually demonstrate fluid dynamics, and that actually you cannot do teh tarik in space. It's impossible to do teh tarik in space, and you would have you could approach the subject of fluid dynamics, which nobody understands, by the way. The public doesn't understand. It's by asking ourselves, can we have teh tarik in space?
Is it even possible?
And imagine the millions of people you would inspire to listen, because how many million people drink teh tarik? And every time you take a teh tarik, you think, yes, I know we can't drink teh tarik in space. You know, how cool would that be?
Precisely.
But people completely misunderstood me. But I got into that, I had so much flack from that, I was not allowed to talk about it anymore, you know. And there was a complete shutdown or blackout on the issue of teh tarik. But as I said, I was completely misunderstood. And it was my fault because I didn't handle the media part very well. And so there were, if you ask me mistakes that I made, that would have been one mistake. I made mistakes with the media, you know. But I'm a scientist, you know. I don't know how to deal with media.
Difficult when there are many different ideas and agendas.
And people can easily pick on something and decide that, okay, this is how I'm going to, you know, make this program look bad. But that was, I think, this. In fact, it was worse than my PhD program. And so after the end of the astronaut program, I said, this is the worst phase of my life, you know. And that was why I left. I went to the United Nations. The day that I retired from the government service, on my birthday itself, because you retire on the birthday.
Oh, yes.
I reported for duty in the UN. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave and give myself a break. That was the reason. It was so tough. Everything was new. We're talking about leadership. Huh? Nothing was routine. Every procedure had to be thought out years in advance. It's not like I'm going to send the astronaut tomorrow, next week, or even next year. I start doing work this year. A lot of the things I had to plan 4 years beforehand. I mean, even the thought of how to inspire the people through this program, which was the main vision or objective, mission of the program, was to inspire the young people. And so I already decided that it would be in 2007, because that would be 50 years of our Merdeka. Whereas the Russians were quite keen to launch our astronaut in 2006. They said, I will launch in 2006. I said, no, I don't want 2006, I want 2007. They said, why, you're delaying it? I said, it's okay, we can delay it because that's a year of the Merdeka. And another thing, I reminded them, that's the 50th anniversary of the Sputnik as well. And so, they said, yes, of course. And then after that, they said, okay, we'll send you in April 2007. Nope, I don't want April 2007, I want October. And I said, why October? And I said, because that is the month that Sputnik actually was launched into space. So that's the real 50th anniversary of space. And of course, Merdeka could be any time. But you had to think about that 4 years ahead. Just because the Russians offer you this date, if you don't have a vision and you're not thinking of the outcomes that you want, you will not strike that what I say lottery in terms of having a launch of the astronaut, Merdeka 50 years, space era 50 years. That to me is a lottery, you know, when everything comes together. But you have to be thinking ahead of everybody else, and nobody will believe you, and nobody will even think of those things.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Doctor. Right, we'll take another short break and we'll come back again very soon. Welcome back, and we're still with Dr. Mazlan Othman. We are on to one of our last few questions.
Yes.
It's a very serious question that I'm sure many viewers would like to know as well. So, do aliens actually exist?
Yes, I would say that categorically affirm that yes, And why, you're going to ask me, because a lot of people, it's what I call the giggle factor when you talk about aliens. But what I want to say in the beginning is we're not going to be talking, when I say aliens, I talk about extraterrestrial life forms, which would
not
come
what
in, not the green guy with the big eyes and little feet. No, I'm talking about extraterrestrial life form. And in the very beginning, you should think to yourselves, we would be so arrogant if we thought that in this large universe, you can't. It's mind-boggling to think how large it is in terms of space, and it's mind-boggling again to think of how many galaxies there are, and if you times that by the number of stars, and around stars there are planets, what makes us think that we are the only life form in the universe? And if you believe in God, what makes us think that God is not in a position to create life elsewhere, outside of Earth? And the history of science shows us that always we realize that there's something bigger and larger than the Earth itself, from Copernicus to Hubble and whatnot. And so, yes, life forms should exist, but it gives us a degree of confidence also, the fact that when we look at extreme environments on Earth, like very cold water under the Antarctic, or hot areas like volcanic vents under the sea, we still find life form. And the fact that life forms can exist under such extreme conditions, so why can't they exist under different different conditions on other planets in the universe? The other thing to think about is also that life, because we are basically made up of carbon. Of course, there's another lecture on why carbon, but there's also another stable element, which is silicon, and life could form out of silicon as well. I mean, there's no reason why not. So it's not just that our shapes are different, because as I always tell people, there are maybe 1 trillion different life forms on Earth, from those things floating in the water to, to dinosaurs.
Yes.
So anything in between.
They could also exist in ways that we are unable to perceive them through our limited senses.
So that is another way, because when life form evolves, it evolves to become the most efficient in accommodating its environment. So it could be in some galaxy, some star, some planet, which had been evolving for many billions of years. So you remember, human beings have only existed for about 1 million years. Yeah. So if there is a life form that has been in existence for, say, 1 billion years for some reason, it could achieve a very, very efficient kind of life form. And my theory is that most efficient life form is to exist as pure energy. So when you exist as pure energy, you don't need food, you don't need anything, but we all exist in some blobs of energy, and we could still be communicating. And so, if we have that sort of life form, you and I cannot comprehend, cannot communicate. And my other argument is, if there is a life form with very highly technologically evolved, it can communicate with us without using language. And it could be communicating with us right now, but we don't know. Yes. So it's up to you to imagine what aliens would like. I used to give children an exercise. I will say, this planet is very watery, like a swamp. Its gravity is very high. Its atmosphere is very dense. What kind of life form do you think can exist? Yeah. And then I'll give them another scenario. This planet is very light. It is very dry or something like that. It almost has no atmosphere. So what sort of life form can exist there? But it's all scientifically, you have to think it through scientifically. Like if the gravity is very high, then we cannot exist as we are, because we're probably on force, because we cannot lift ourselves up. So it could only be lizards or something that exists there. But if it's very light, we all whatever exists there will be floating. But it needs scientific thinking. But as I say, you have to think about what are the conditions, and it's so exciting. It's so exciting to think what life forms might exist. And I'm like so disappointed every time people, even Star Wars, it's still people with 2 legs and 2 hands, and why can't they go beyond that?
It has to fit into a certain mold
yeah,
that we
I know,
have.
but I suppose that's what people will
From
relate
Hollywood,
to.
I suppose, yeah.
Star Wars does a good job, of course, of trying to see what, and Star Trek, what other sort of life forms exist. But in the end, they always make us interact with things that are similar to us.
Right.
So unimaginative.
Right. I have one last question for you.
Yes.
What inspires you? What keeps you going?
I think because people ask me this question and I have given different answers in the past, but I think what keeps me going is basically my curiosity. I'm always curious. I mean, because when I was, I think about the thirst for knowledge and all that, but I was a child, I wasn't like that. But as a child, I was always curious. I know I was curious. I always get into trouble because I was curious. And until today, I'm curious, you know. So, like right now, I'm curious about what's going to happen to us, you know, at the turn of the next century, for instance. What sort of world would that be? So, what keeps me up at night is thinking, what sort of society will my grandchildren grow up in, you know? And then what makes it sleepless is how do we prepare ourselves for that kind of society, for that kind of environment? Do we allow ourselves to be taken there kicking and screaming, you know, without us knowing where we want to go? How do we position ourselves? That's terribly important. As an individual, of course, but as a nation, it's even more important and so critical.
Yes.
But not enough of us are thinking in that.
that
All you want
manner,
to know is what is the next iPhone, you know, what is it going to look like? You don't think beyond the invention of the iPhone. What next? What do you think you will get after the iPhone and the iPads or whatever?
Would you have some short words of advice for our viewers then?
Advice, you know, I suppose if you, okay, this is about leadership. So if you're talking about leadership advice, I find that to be a good leader, you must be versatile. You must change your thinking, your actions according to the situation. Whether you're talking to your own people, you're talking to outside people, or whether you're trying to see where your company is going next. That versatility is so important. There's no one leadership style that is good all the time. Sometimes you have to be authoritative. Yeah, like Lee Kuan Yew or Mahathir they had to be authoritative because they felt they knew what the future would look like and this is how we're going to get there. But sometimes you have to be consensual. You ask, you know, where do you think we should be going? And sometimes you have to lead in a nice way, in a way of coaching, which is different from being authoritative. So as I said, you have to be versatile. You have to have all the skills. So there's not one single skill that makes you a good leader. And you've got to keep reading, learning and growing, listening and growing. It's tough to be a leader, huh?
It really isn't
easy.
Yes. Thank you very much for coming on the show today, for sharing with us all those insightful discoveries that you've made in your own life.
You're welcome.
Right, we hope we'll be able to see you again soon.
Yes, sure.
All right. Thank you very much for tuning in.